started. Hi. Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming out to our session that is titled Crafting Home. I'm going to be in conversation with these wonderful poets on stage. To my immediate left is Radna Fabias, and next to her is Ishion Hutchinson, and then on the other end is Toni Stuart. So I am not going to introduce them myself. I'm going to ask them to read a poem or two each, just by way of kind of introducing themselves. Maybe some of you have not really read their works, or you've just kind of read a few. So I'd like them to introduce themselves with their own voices. And perhaps it would also be useful to incorporate the notion of home in your introduction. So just say where you're from, and maybe you can problematize it. It's not always an easy thing to say. So yeah, let's listen to the poets first, and then we will be in conversation. I'm not sure who would like to go first, but go for it. Yeah.
I was born on the island Curaçao, which is a former Dutch colony. I was born and raised there. I moved to the Netherlands when I was 17 years old, and I've been living there ever since. So that's like half of my life was spent in the Caribbean, and half of my life was spent in the Netherlands. And I write in Dutch. Maybe we could talk about this later. Oh, and I'm gonna do the Dutch version of the poem, and Toni is kind enough to help me and read the English translation for you guys. Exorcisme. Ik sla hem herhaaldelijk, ritmisch met twijgjes op de rug, zodra hij terug is. Ik zorg dat de kamer waarin ik dat doe naar gekneusde rozen en kutvocht ruikt. Hij zal zeggen dat hij iets kwijt is, dat iets hem heeft verlaten, en hij zal mij verdenken. Hoe durft hij? Ik vergeef hem.
Exorcism. Translation by Scott Ingram Jarrett. I beat him repeatedly, rhythmically, on his back as soon as he returns. I make sure the room where I do this smells of crushed roses and wet cunt. He will say he's lost something, that something has left him. He will suspect me. How dare he? I forgive him.
Ik nurrie een wiegelied en loof hem. Hij is herboren. Ik zoek om hem heen en waar ooit lichaam was. Ik streel wat verloren ging met mijn vingertoppen. Dit is mijn man, zuster. Na voorarrest weer opgestaan, weer gestruikeld, weer gezeten en opnieuw herrezen. Ik sla een kruis voor hem en noem hem Christus.
I hum a lullaby and praise him. He is born again. I search the space where his body once was. I caress what was lost with my fingertips. This is my man, sister. Rose again after remand, tripped again, did time again, is risen once more. I draw a cross for him and call him Jesus.
Ik was zorgvuldig het gezongen van onvrijheid uit zijn oren, zodat het geluid van mijn sleutelbos hem geen doodsangst meer inboezemt.
I carefully wash the buzz of bondage from his ears, so that the sound of my keys no longer strikes terror within him.
Ik prijs hem. Ik zorg ervoor dat hij ligt terwijl ik dit doe. Ik zorg ervoor dat ik kniel als ik dit doe.
I praise him. I make sure he's lying down while I do this. I make sure I kneel as I do this.
Ik schroop zijn pols en ik spreek tegen zijn longen over zuurstof. Ik verplaats alle meubelen voor zijn comfort. De gordijnen mogen nooit meer dicht. Hij moet alle ramen kunnen zien en ik moet doorzichtig worden, zodat hij ook door mij heen kan kijken.
I scrub his wrists. I tell his lungs about oxygen I move. All furniture for his comfort. The curtains are never to be closed for him. He has to be able to see all windows at all times, and I must become transparent so he can also see through me.
Ik vertel hem dat claustrofobie een leugen is. Ik houd hem tegen als hij 's nachts naar buiten wil. Ik houd zijn voeten vast. Ik bezweer de suïcidale tendensen met mijn boezem, mijn scheuren. Ik ben zijn vrouw.
I tell him claustrophobia is a lie. I keep him from going out at night. I hold his feet, fend off the suicidal tendencies with my bosom, my cracks. I am his hollow.
Ik bestrooi zijn lichaam met bruine suiker en bid dat hij zoet wordt. Ik strooi op het bed, op hem, op zijn gedachten. Zelfgeplukte halfdode veldbloemen, confetti voor de zieke en zijn doodsangst.
I sprinkle his body with brown sugar and pray he turns sweet. I sprinkle on the bed, on him, on his thoughts, hand-picked, half-dead, wildflowers, confetti for the sick and his death anxiety.
Ik poets de schuld van zijn buik. Ik doe het grondig. Ik neem wat huid mee, die groeit terug.
I brush the blame from his belly. I do this thoroughly. I take some skin with me. It will grow back.
Ik zeg rustig, maar als ik bedoel, ik weet niet waarom ik hier nog ben. Ik vergelijk mezelf nooit meer met de wind. Ik stort me op hem als een waterval.
I say hush now, when I mean I don't know why I'm still here. I no longer compare myself to the wind. I throw myself on him like a waterfall.
Ik vertel hem dat het verdriet in mijn buik was gaan zitten. Ik moest me wassen, wassen, wassen. Ik laat hem zien hoe het niet hielp.
I tell him that the sadness had settled in my stomach. I had to wash, wash, wash myself. I show him how this did not help.
Ik toon mijn nieuwe jukbeen en sleutelbeen, de heuppotten. Zo had ik mezelf nog nooit gezien. Ik zeg, ik ben door jou, voor jou gekrompen. Ik draag geen blaam in mijn stem.
I show my cheekbones, collarbones, hip bones. I never seen myself like this, I say. I've shrunk for you, because of you. I carry no blame in my voice.
Ik verstop zijn schuld achter mijn ogen waar niemand komt. Ik verstop daar ook de vraag en je weet wel hoe je verder of liefdereductie is. Hoe klein een vrouw kan worden.
I hide his fault behind my eyes. I also hide the questions, you know. What now? Whether love is reduction, how small a woman can become.
Ik laat zijn 12 straatnamen in 2 rechte lijnen van mijn borsten naar mijn enkels tatoeëren en ik zeg, hiermee zet ik mezelf op slot.
I have his 12 street names tattooed in 2 straight lines, from my breasts to my ankles, I say, and so I lock myself up.
Ik was hem tot hij slaapt. Ik gebruik speeksel als het water op is.
I wash him until he falls asleep. I use saliva when the water runs out.
Ik negeer de stank. Dit is mijn man, zuster. Dit is geen graf.
I ignore the stench. This is my man, sister. This is no grave.
Als hij slaapt, als hij tenslotte slaapt, nestel ik me in zijn torso, zodat hij zijn rit niet meer mist.
When he sleeps, when he finally sleeps, I nestle in his torso, so he no longer lacks a rib.
I feel I've lost my voice. Lost somewhere along the trail of that poem, so embodied and powerful. What a great way to introduce our panel. So my name is Ishion. I am from Port Antonio, Jamaica, which means nothing to you, but a small town in the eastern section of the island. It's a coastal town, village, mostly fishing, but if it has any fame, due to tourism, similar to Cape Town maybe. But there was a swashbuckling hero who landed on our shores in the 70s, a man by the name of Errol Flynn, who, when his boat was blown off course because of a storm and literally landed on the shore in Port Antonio, got up from the sand, brushed himself and said, "This place is more beautiful than any woman I've ever seen." And so far we've been trying to live up to that exclamation. So I think I have no disillusion about home per se, geographically and as a place. The history of Jamaica and where I'm from specifically is very easy to understand and even to process. One is told important dates and so on and so forth. And so home has its kind of documentary aspect to it. But I think of home as a place, yes, but more so as a condition for me. And if I had to label the condition, I would probably call it childhood. So somewhere between not having a conscience or consciousness and coming to consciousness and consciousness being brutalized and becoming awakened to the brutality of history, somewhere between 0 and 8. And at 8 you start to realize this world is really messed up. And you start to think differently about this beautiful landscape and this amazing privilege of living in a space with such grand beauty. Suddenly the landscape itself has horror attached to it. The cane is no longer this peaceful plant of green blowing in the wind, but one knows it's washed with the blood of the ancestor and so on. So what I've always, what I've occupied my own mind and imagination as I deal with home is trying to account for that disturbance. I think it's the Australian poet Les Murray, who died not too long ago, who said something that home is the first and last wound, right? And I think those are words of wisdom. We are wounded by home, and we can't help but love it anyways, as much as we try to escape and write out of it. I think I will begin with a poem in which the main figure, a boy named Pierre, and that's the title of the poem. I've always thought of him as a kind of mixture of Errol Flynn and some sort of a local maverick. This little boy who had an uncanny ability to disappear. And I didn't intend a pun on his name or to rhyme his name that way. It just happened to be that his name is Pierre and disappear. And only to say, I imagine very similarly to South Africa, this experience is common to you guys as much as Jamaica, where primary school is just a place where you are sort of taught down to. You're given all these instructions, and you're not expected to really participate in knowledge. You're just a vessel to be filled. And so that's partly the experience behind the poem, and Pierre being a sort of a counter to that passive structuring. Pierre. It was a boy named Pierre Powell who was in charge of the atlas in the cabinet. He also ended days by shaking the iron bell from Principal Williams's window, a work we grudged him for very little. What cut our cores twice a week and we had to endure was him being summoned to fetch the key, again from Williams's office, to open the varnished box with the world map, old and laminated, a forbidden missionary gift, trophied beside the Oxford set of mathematical instruments and other things seen only by Pierre and Teacher Rose, who now only nodded to raise him to his duty. We waited in quiet his return. Miss Rose, all crinkled blouse and bones with chalk dust in her hair, did not stir until he was back, panting at the door. Another diviner's nod, and they opened it, unrolled the map expertly, kneaded out creases, and held down edges for the ruler our eyes followed, screeching out countries, and etched in the periphery a khaki-pillared pier with a merchant smile, a fixed blur in our cry of Algeria, Switzerland, Chile, soon withered away, and we eyed the field of dry grass outside, a rusty mule statue frozen in the punishable heat, Pierre, a phantom sea fraying over Antarctica, Fiji, Belize, India. Of those still in the roof, a liturgy of dunce bats whose once Cardinal Point Tropicana sugar estate, so close we could smell the sugar being processed, whistled its shift change and terminated geography. As if punched from dream, those of us gazers spared the map rolling up and cabinet locking ceremony, saw him with a cord-strung key, an earnest ear bearing him away in a portal of sunlight. He was absent the week before summer, and when Miss Rose, in rare fashion, inquired, a girl said he had gone back home. Home? Miss Rose sounded the strange word. Home, the girl echoed and added, him from Cayman, miss, or Canada, somewhere with a C. We turned to Miss Rose to clarify Canada, or Cayman, this elsewhere sea curdled to snow in our minds, foreign, always spectral. But she pointed anonymously, a crooked finger, and said, run to the principal for the key. The whole class scattered, paid no heed that not a single one was ordained.
So I am born and raised in Cape Town, in Athlone, and I have a line in another poem which, when Ishion kind of said the Les Marie quote, I was reminded of, home is the place you learn to leave. Home is the place you unlock from around you, its grip vice-like, stifling the soft shuffle of the voice that gives your skin its flesh. And so I think for me, the journey of home has been an interesting one because it's less the physical place, but a journey of learning how to find a way of being at home in my own skin. for many different reasons. And so if I think about a geographical place, Athlone is definitely home. Like, I'm very aware that I am who I am because of the fact that I grew up in that place for all the best reasons, and also for all the difficult ones. And more recently, I think my exploration of home is my mother passed away 3.5 years ago, and so this body that was my first home is no longer in this world. And so what does it mean to find home when your mother passes on as an adult? And so this poem is The Mother's Veil. The mother's veil is a mantilla, a lace shield from the dust threatening to settle her skin and scratch her brown irises. The mother's veil is a white mantilla mourning her own death. The mother's veil is a black mantilla shrouding her eyes. The mother's sweat laces the veil, imprinting her onto its silk surface. Here the nose, here the cheekbones, here the forehead with its frown lines, here the chin, and all the palms which held it in worry or soothing. No rain will remove this imprint. No sea will cleanse this stain. The mother's veil is draped over her bowed head. The mother is kneeling with her hands in prayer. The mother is kneeling, knees bare on red sand. The mother's fingertips whisper prayers to one another. The sound is sandpaper scraping against the girl's sleeping ear. The sound is a frou-frou of feathers across the girl's sleeping brow. The sound is a palm petting the girl's sleeping crown. In the red dust of the mother's breath, the sun is a filter. No words may pass through its beams or curtains wafting across Sunday's thirst. Here sound is created and destroyed. The red dust is a silence no human ear can withstand. The mother's veil is the original sound. The mother's veil is a mantilla hiding what must stay hidden. It wraps itself around every breath. Breath born of words will crumble in its embrace. Breath born of silence suckles a sound too beautiful for the waking ear to hear. The girl must take herself to sleep.
Yes, thank you so much for those readings that lead me to a discussion about the body as the first home that we inhabit. Or you said it's the second, the mother's is the first. But Toni, especially through your work, there's an exploration of how home is extended in, felt and lived through the body, and that history and geography shape both the body and the home. History and geography inform this feeling of being out of place in one's body, that the body is the first home you inhabit, also informs a feeling of being out of joint with the material home, especially if the material home inculcates feelings of fear, of shame, where the weight of history is domestic, it's in the home, where the body and the home carries these racial categories, is marked by them, and silence in the material home and in the physical home. In the body as a whole, right? So I'm offering these readings of your work, and then I'll just allow you to respond to them, and then we'll just have that conversation. Radna, in your poetry, there's a sense of an unsettledness. So it's unsettling, but the unsettling that comes across in the poetry is is caused by an unsettledness. There's a kind of unrootedness, a feeling of disorientation in the poetry, a restlessness, a feeling of transitory, like being in transition. I mean, some of the titles, in passing, roost. Roost is neither here nor there. In passing is a passage, not before the passage or on the other side of it. Bride is also kind of in the passage, right? And in-betweenness. And in the poetry, all associations with home, the conventional ones at least, are absent. So I quote from your poetry, there's no language. There's no room to sleep in. Those associations. There's no faith. When you speak of home, there's a refrain, rooms we cannot occupy. So the rooms that we don't sleep in, this is what happens. That room that we never sit in, this is what happens there. And I was struck by the one line within this poem that a volcano sooner sounds more habitable than a home. Yeah, that blew me away.
Recognizing the heat.
Yes, the heat is on. Rupture is home. There's disarray, disorder, instability. I think you'll pick up on that and kind of explain it. And Ishion, in your work, I just wanted to speak to this idea of, so his collection is called House of Lords and Commons. It's his second collection. There's also 5 districts. But I want to play on your own title and think about that Lords and Commons throughout history have always been marked by a particular body, or commoners rather than commons, and that perhaps what you call a consciousness that is brutalized in your younger years can be related to the body as a site or a marker of a commoner that distinguishes you from the lords in the Caribbean. And I just want to start there. You can respond to that and then we'll see how the conversation goes.
Yeah. I think the way I relate to the concept of home starts from like this absence of the place that I can call that. I think if there is any place in which I am at home, it is, like you pointed out, there's something about being in transit that feels to me can be a home, obviously, because being in transit is not being at home, but being in transit is what I recognize as the thing that comes as close to a home as I would ever know, I guess. You said many things, so I'm gonna try to touch a couple of those. There is a problem of language, because I was raised in the Caribbean, but I was raised in the Dutch Caribbean, so English is not my first language. Dutch is not my first language. I actually don't have a first language, so I am not rooted in one language. I don't feel like there's one language in which I like my memories are even scattered. Like some people I would speak to in Spanish, some people I would speak to in Dutch, some people I would speak to in English, and some people I would only speak to in Papiamento because that's the only language they spoke. So even my memories are like scattered language-wise. The only reason I write in Dutch is because living in the Netherlands, I felt all the other languages I speak weaken. And through continuous use, I felt the Dutch grows stronger, and I prefer to write in a language where I feel some kind of power. And it's also difficult writing in Dutch, because it's strange to feel power in Dutch. That's a long ass story we're not gonna get into. But at the same time, like, and this is the place where poetry becomes important to me, in kind of producing something that could pass as even like a temporary home, is that it gives me the chance to use the Dutch language and to inflict violence on the language, and to kind of look for ways. Although, because my papiamento, which is the language my grandparents spoke and my mom spoke, and there's a big story about me also having to go to a certain school because my chances of further education were greater if I would go to a certain school. And of course, it was a Dutch school, you guys know the drill. But like that language it stirs things in me, like the rhythm of it, it's important to me. So it was like in poetry and in writing in general, I had the chance of trying to grab those things that were important to me and that touched me from Papiamento, and try to like kind of like force that rhythm into Dutch, which is not the most fun thing to do. At first, because the Dutch language I feel is very, how shall I put this nicely? It's stiff. It's in a certain way, I feel it's a stiff language. But that movement of trying to like, and it feels like a violent movement to me. The entire book is probably violent to read also. So that was important, and language-wise, the other thing that was important to me, relating to the concept of home, is that I come from a place where it wasn't necessarily, it made no sense that I would write coming from that place. I mean, socioeconomically speaking, it made no sense. I was the first woman in my family to pursue further education, so it made no sense to go and do creative writing, because when you do get that chance, you try to go to medical school or like law school and then make everyone proud on the islands, because that's the thing we do. Like when people graduate, people would put it in the papers, like you wouldn't even be living there, you would be in the Netherlands and people would put it in the paper on the island just to like, yeah, my daughter graduated and is now a lawyer. So it made no sense. But that place, again, as opposed to the place where I was taught how to write in a way that people would relate to in the literary field in the Netherlands, those words were not used there. So I went on like a quest for like, where are my little words? What is the language I spoke when I was being raised? What is the language? And then you also touch upon things like class and upon things like there are certain ways of speaking that people look down on or frowned upon. And looking for that, and producing that kind of like took me closer and closer to that home that I obviously left, and that I can't ever get back. So every time I went back there to do research for the book, the place was like, in a way, the same, and in a way also falling apart and not being the place I was raised in. So like most of this book is just like, especially the first section of the book is like trying to find ways to pull all of that back and put it into language and hurting things that should be heard, and kind of like finding ways to look for comfort where that comfort wasn't present, and and getting like real sad in between. So I mean, I don't even know if what I just said still relates to your question, but I feel it relates to the home thing and to the being in transit all the time. I have no home. I don't even have a home in the language. So I try to produce things that look like it for a short while and then move on and move on and move on. So.
Okay. I think in a way I want to pick up on the trail of some of the things Radna said. I think in a sense, what I'm taking from some of what you've said touch on what I would probably think of as a form of exile.
Yeah.
Right? Or an exilic being. Yeah. Meaning one is the first home is lost, or one has been forced out of it. And I mean, that's a very common position for many people. And one can feel that position even at home, especially with the violent histories behind the homes that we inhabit. You can raise the monster of colonialism. We're both Caribbean people here. And if someone were officially speaking of the Caribbean, that person is right to say the Dutch Caribbean. On my side, the English Caribbean. What does that mean? That is a form of violence being visited upon citizens of these islands who have to sort of live under these labels, right? So of course, like what you said, the poet puts on her superhero cape and turns the language upside down, inside out, because we have no other resort, really, but language. And if any battle is going to be fought and won, it has to be done in language. And so that is why we continue, and we have to rediscover the languages of the grandmothers and so on, because they were very powerful people, but never were honored with that ability to survive through generations. So we are inheritors of a kind of a tradition of refusal, even of standing when no ground is there to stand on, and so on. So, though we, though the poet in a certain historical placing is continuously conflicted about using language because it's what the colonizers' tongue and so on and so forth. There is an aspect of the being a poet which is not language-based. One of the things you mentioned is rhythm. Because making a poem is a very highly self-conscious act, right? It is, writing prose has a level of self-consciousness about it, of course, because you're writing, you're concentrating and so on. But there's no successful poem that isn't highly concentrated, that isn't condensed to its bare essential. I've always admired something the Romantic poet Coleridge said about, which I think is the best definition for me of poetry. Prose is word in the best order, and poetry is the best word in the best order, right? And this level of best, it's not some sort of essentialism or anything like that, but an ethics of, but a work that can provide some sort of joy, which I search for in my own creative work. I'll just say one thing about one of the points raised for you. You was a brilliant discussion. You just summarized our whole lives. That was like the bossiest move I've ever seen. That was really, Stellenbosch's finest.
They don't know what they have. They're lucky they have her.
It's true. You mentioned the title of my book, House of Lords and Commons. And of course it carries the political valences of the parliamentary system of British rulership through several generations and so on. And what I can say for myself is, it's meant, of course, ironically, it's an ironic gesture because in the context of the history of the Caribbean and its colonial past, all of the laws and the system of governance that enslaved people still remain, as we have entered into independence. And one then wonders, can you come to a real political freedom if this system of governance continue to be the way of rulership? And so I mean, I know that yes, the answer is yes. Rhetorically you can only say yes. Of course we won't be free as we want to be when this is the system of governance, because of its vestige of power is too corrupt. But then the question of the alternative is raised, and that is a fraught. The answers have been so far unsuccessful. We've seen that in many post-colonial countries, so-called post-colonial countries, where they've either collapsed into dictatorships and so on. But nonetheless, I think drawing attention to and constantly critiquing the government that we have is the one way, or one of the ways to address power and to hopefully let power become even as self-conscious as the making of a poem. So that was sort of the thinking behind the title. I'll stop there.
I'm going to respond to both of them I've said, because I think you mentioned the Dutch Caribbean and the English Caribbean, and the reality of South Africa is that we had both of those influences. And I'm thinking about Luanda Sindapi's poem, which is part of the show What the Water Remembers, and it's a Xhosa poem, and one of the lines is, "The water remembers the violence of the Dutch and the British." And I think for me what's interesting is that it's so rare that we have a chance to have a conversation across the Atlantic Ocean, because there's so many similarities. And poetry is the thing that taught me this. It's Caribbean poetry that kind of expanded what was possible for me in my own writing and got me exploring and crafting in new ways, specifically around home. So reading Kamau Braithwaite's The Arrivals, and reading Joan and Addo's Imawinda. And so I think this is really special for me, the fact that we're sitting here having these conversations, and it speaks to what you mentioned, Uhuru, around that the history and the geography and how that shapes both the body and home, and how there are universal experiences across our kind of global south geographies that are working through our poems. And the thing that I'm thinking about is this thing of they are the homes we inherit. So the geographical homes we inherit, the cultural homes we inherit, and then the physical home of the body that we inherit. And then what Ishion mentioned, this act of poetry and the way in which you were speaking about writing. For me, the act of poetry is that we are making and remaking and reimagining homes through language. That it feels to me that that's what our work is doing. And for me specifically, it's dismantling the silence in the homes that I come from and dismantling the silence in the culture that I come from and kind of almost taking things apart and putting things back together. And I've been working a lot more with prose and with forms that allow that to happen, because there seems to be, it's almost like, it feels like a hornet's nest often. And so how do you like unpick things and trying to find forms and poetic structures that allow one to sit in the like disarray and to really look at this and go like, this is really difficult. Like, I was classified as colored, but I'm light-skinned and I have all this privilege that only in my adult life realized. But then at the same time, I come from a very, like, I'm one of the few people in my family who has a university degree, and if I go and like chill with my extended family, their lives are completely different to mine, and they don't move in the spaces that I move in, and they don't look like me, you know. And so really feeling like so much part of that world, but then so much part of this other world as well. And that thing of pulling apart all these pieces and seeing what they are. I mean, I was obsessed with Lego as a child, obviously. And then like try, not even putting them back together, but seeing like if I put this piece with this piece in a poem, this piece with this piece in a poem, which feels a bit like what you're speaking about through how we use language. And I think in South Africa, language was a tool of violence. It was the tool of violence. Like we haven't fully yet reckoned with the fact that language is the tool which the kind of like government used to be violent. It was the first tool. And so actually this work of being a writer and this work of working with language is so radical, you know, because what we're doing is we are kind of creating new ways of seeing ourselves and new ways of speaking about ourselves. And if we look at this week that we've just been in the country, there's this thing of like, we have to change the narrative. And the thing that I've been thinking about is that we actually have to understand the narrative before we can change the narrative. And I don't yet think that as a country goes around the xenophobia and around the violence against women, we actually fully understand the narratives and how entrenched they are and how insidious they are and how subtle they are. And until we do that reckoning, the change is going to be superficial. And so I'm thinking about that across all of our various kind of origins and the things we carry with us as we write. You know.
Yeah, I feel this is a story I've been telling myself, so this is basically what I reproduced for you guys, that I don't have a home. I started with this kind of language situation, blah blah blah. I've been living in Europe now for 17, 18 years. I've been traveling mostly through Europe. If I do go somewhere, I'm here now because of the writing, but I was mostly in Europe. What I did not say, and what is really happening to me with frightening immediacy since I landed here in Cape Town, that the first time I went to Stellenbosch the first time, and then I came to Cape Town, and I'm sorry too. Everyone should be sorry for everyone involved in this situation. But something happened to me the first time I came to South Africa, and I think it touches upon what you just said about the global South and you looking to Caribbean writers. I feel like the moment I left Stellenbosch, which is basically, I keep telling people there's not a place, it's like a film set, and then went out to actual places where the people I knew were supposed to be in South Africa lived. I couldn't find them there. And then came to Cape Town. I started feeling like I was basically, I remember this one drive, they were driving us from Stellenbosch to the University of Western Cape. And I was basically driving through my youth. And there was this one moment that I was sitting in the car and almost crying because we passed this house and it was there was this dolphin spray painted on the wall. And I swear to God, it was the same dolphin I knew from my hood. And it was just different colors, but I think they used the same, it's probably a stencil. And I was like, no, this can't be, but also culturally, and in terms of ways people are struggling with things like language. And I'm completely fascinated by Afrikaans. I want to get in there. Like that there's something happening there that I feel it has been a part of my process, but I haven't been able to talk about these things because I'm in a European context where, as we've touched upon before, there is not a very big presence of people who are not from that place. So in terms of feeling at home or touching things that remind me of the place I used to call home or where I was raised, I feel like being here is like a big flashback. And even reading work from South African writers the first time I was here and talking to South Africans while being here, I feel like, oh, but wait, like these, it's somewhere it's comforting because it tells me that some of the pains I was working through writing this, and this is a great thing about sharing these things, is that you find out that your pain is not exceptional and that it is shared by many, many, many people. And at the same time, it's also completely devastating to see the repetition of that like over and over and over again. And I have a very complicated relationship with language because like I find everything in language, but when things get really dark, I lose my belief in language completely, and that leaves me nowhere. So these are like the big moments of complete desperation for me. Like I just don't know where to put myself. And it happens sometimes when like reality strikes. Like you can write and you can be at war through language, which I do believe like it's a tool of violence and it's a weapon. And sometimes I don't believe it's anything. It's just words.
Yeah.
Like where the body is concerned. But it's not only, not always. You get?
Preach, sister.
No, but it's a very difficult space to be in because words do matter. And now obviously I'm a writer, so I need to believe at least a bit of that. But like if I'm walking around, I started writing down like the warnings people were giving me the moment I came to Cape Town. I was telling people like, I'm going from Stellenbosch to Cape Town. Are you taking anyone? I'm like, no, I'm going alone. You're going to Cape Town alone. Okay. So people started like give me warnings, like things I should do, things I shouldn't do. I started writing them down. I have like pages of these. This is not funny to me. And those are words, but those words relate to things that happen to the body. And walking through this space reminds me of this weird disconnect I make every time I turn these things into words. Because the reality of it is that bodies are not safe. And in many ways, and not just in this context, but also in Europe. And I feel like I would like to hear you guys about it, although I feel like it doesn't really touch upon the subject of home, per se. But the body is a home, yeah. But like I feel like the big hunger to talk to writers about like, but like if we're talking in abstractions. Those are abstractions. I do that also, You go to the abstract to understand what's happening here. But then, and then...
Words do matter.
They do.
And I was saying this to you earlier because you were feeling such a sense of despair after the kind of week that we had.
I was.
And I was making a point that I had blocked off all of this past week to read and engage with your work. And I had planned that perhaps a month ago, not knowing the kind of, excuse my French, shitstorm that is going to happen this week.
Yeah.
And I felt like, should I go home and read poetry right now? And I did.
Yeah.
And I found solace.
Yeah.
I found a salve.
Yeah.
I was held in particular ways. I could breathe again. So words matter. Policies matter. Protests matter. They all matter. There's no absolutism.
Yes.
And there's not one that is more important than the other.
And I think it's it's just because you mentioned words and you mentioned policy in the same sentence, and I'm thinking about Diana Ferris's poem for Sarki Batman, I've Come to Take You Home, and how a French parliamentarian had found this poem and read it and put it in, because he found this poem, this person who was advocating to have Sarki Batman's remains returned. This poem was then included in the legislation, and it's now there. And because of that poem, the policy changed, and those remains were brought back to South Africa. And I think it's powerful. I think there is something about, I hear your concern about the abstraction. I think for me personally, in the work that I do both with young people and using poetry in social justice spaces, it's very real, like how this thing of using words, because I think for me very directly, it's not just like the words in the book, it's like the work with young people, and it's, using poetry to talk about violence in the public health system, using poetry.
Even giving words to violence, because I'm also torn in this. I'm not always in that space. I just it's the despair, and then I'm drawn to that space in which I think, what's the point? And that's mostly in dark times, because obviously, literature has kept me off the street, and I dare to say it even kept me alive at certain points, and it's very important, I think, to also find words for the different sorts of grief, because you're also trying to, by doing this, you're also, maybe there's this one person you're actually helping to give words to a certain kind of violence, a certain kind of, whatever that feeling is, whatever that person is processing, especially with poetry, because I feel poetry is a lot of the times is concerned with the in-between spaces, the things we don't really have words for in regular conversation, and we kind of dig into it, and then we come up with something that sort of touches upon it, and I know the value of that, and it's been important for me. I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm still here. And still I struggle. So I see this and I believe it, and in my best moments while writing, and even sometimes while reading, when people come to me afterwards, I know that it has done something. Even the part of my family that actually read my work. I have this one cousin, she just basically couldn't stop crying, and I know those are not just sad tears,
Perhaps I can just jump in here and focus on the other part of the title of our talk, crafting.
Yeah.
Because we focused on home. Now perhaps crafting is as important, and I want to turn to Ishion and talk about the history that is lived in your poetry, but it's also living. It is living in the present moment. And in one of your poems, you write, very beautifully about it, but you say music dismantles history. And in the music, you hear the voices of Columbus, as well as the voices of our heroes who are asleep in the aqua grave of the ocean floor. You write, and I quote, "Both cries have congealed into one coral reef in my ear. I hear them everywhere I go." And I just, this is gorgeous. And I just wanted you to then, explore that.
Great. Thank you. I'm very lucky in many respects to have been born in Jamaica with the cultural heritage that I just found myself in as a birthright. So nothing I had to work for. It was just given. The best music. Because it's as any I'm not even talking about reggae. that's only the second best. Because of course you have dub music, which uses word very sparsely. So it's a music that marries the many traditional instruments, particularly bass, the bass sound, drums, but various other instruments from various other heritages and so on. But the dub music does something that could have only happened maybe in the Caribbean space, but in particular Jamaica, with its sound system culture, right? Where these genius of listeners, these producers, they weren't musicians themselves, who had an ear for listening to various music and wanting to put it all together, right? And you have to cut and skew. It's like making a very good dish. So where nothing is overbalanced or outstripping the other, but finding an equilibrium, right? And they're doing this in the 70s when things are rough in Jamaica. Politically, the country was extremely violent, right? And they had to create this music for people to dance to every night of the week. So they would bring out these big sound boxes that to me always seem to be, monumental sculptures, and they just put them out and blast the air with music made during the day. So it has to be fresh, it has to be new, and so on. So that's a craft, that's a poetics that I think every Jamaican is to a degree familiar, even if you don't want it, because you will hear that music from your.
So Kwame Dawes has this thing, the reggae aesthetic.
Yes.
And he talks about poetry from the Caribbean and how the reggae aesthetic has informed these poetics. And it's really interesting because I think that's similar to what you're speaking to. And he has a whole he's like to look at the paper on the 5 points. Mm-hmm. There's these 5 principles of reggae and how they can be read in the poetics of certain poets from the Caribbean. It's really, it sounds a lot like
Yeah.
But this is where you craft from.
Yes and no. So that's, I would say, is something that is a part of me. Because it's where my ear first came alive to sounds coming in from the window. And so it just wasn't the environment, but it's an artificial sound. And I knew it was, who are these guys who made this thing? And growing up knowing that they're mostly from the ghettos, or they're from rural parts of the country and ended up in the ghetto. And so they were making medicine, and just delivering it like that. But when I took on, when I was in high school, a teacher told me that I'm a poet, and it became a curse that I had to live up to. Right. But he was my Shakespeare teacher, a Rastafarian man who taught Shakespeare, who had this deep passion for, he could recite all of the great passages, and then during recess, it's just all Rastafari. And then in class it was, you better get that sentence correct. So and I wasn't getting it correct. And this is something that has always meant a great deal to me. I think another teacher would have pointed out that I'm doing so poorly, and said, "You're doing poorly and you need to pull up your socks." But he said, "You're doing poorly because you want to do something else. You're not writing the proper essay because something else is trying to come out. So you can, tell you what, you work with me, you work with me on what you're trying to write, And I'm gonna do the essay. It's very emotional speaking about it because yeah.
He was crafty.
He was crafty. Yeah. You need help.
How are we doing on time? Over. I wanted to talk about the politics of refusal because they're just cutting across. But maybe we can take a question from the audience and they will ask about it. Let's take 2 questions and then we're gonna. Okay, there's one there. And anybody else want to ask a question? Then we take 2.
Going once, going twice.
Go for it.
This question is going to be very weird because I don't even know how to put it, because what you were saying, all of you actually, because it sort of bounced, it trickled. Because a lot of people see poetry, as you had said, like the moments in between. With song, there's the assistance of melody. So it gets to have this life of its own as a song, and we can box it into a song. How do you wrap your mind around poetry? Because a lot of people, even like in professional spaces, people will tell you, oh, poetry doesn't sell, people don't read poetry. It feels like poetry is so stripped down. It doesn't have those supporters. It doesn't have the visual of film. But it is also a piece in making these moments that you're referring to. Just as somebody who is interested in poetry, how do you begin to understand language? And poetry and those moments in between? I don't know if it makes sense.
Are you asking for a friend? Are you interested in poetry and writing poetry?
I mean, I don't even want to make it about me right now. But, like seriously.
I'm trying to get you to make it a point that.
Make it about you though.
Yeah.
Make it about you.
Then we
We're
can
making
know
it
that
up.
actually let's walk together and then maybe these poets can guide you. So I'm trying to get to a point where we understand.
But is there anybody who can hear me there? Like a little, just kind of like understand what I'm trying to say.
But do you feel there's really a difference between like something like a song or like rap and a poem? Because you're talking about melody. But
No. You know what? We let's speak after this.
You're more than welcome to that.
Yeah.
We are open on the.
Yeah, we can smoke.
Yeah.
All right. I'd like to thank these fabulous poets.